Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about the heavy support units for the Mechanicum faction in Horus Heresy, the Age of Darkness. We're going to be talking about all the loadouts, their equipment, what they're good at, what they're bad at, and how you can maybe use them on the tabletop in your games. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and a subscribe. If you've got any feedback, please leave it in the comments down below on YouTube. And don't forget to join us on our Discord server as well, the link for which you can find in the video description. And now, on with the show. The first unit to discuss is the Thanatar Siege Automata Maniple, giant robots with big guns on their shoulders. Somewhat comparable to a Leviathan Dreadnought in sort of toughness levels, toughness 8, 7 wounds, 2+ save, quite tough to kill, not super expensive in points either, actually a bit cheaper than Leviathan Dreadnought. They're a pretty good unit. There's two different kinds, and we're going to talk about them both. But first, a couple of things that they've got in common. These are a really good place to hide your Patris Cybernetica models, where they can join a robot unit, because no one wants to have to shoot their way through a Thanatar to get at your characters, which is really good. And these guys are also actually pretty good with Paragon of Metal as well. So +1 wound takes them to 8 wounds with that big 8 toughness. It will not die 4+ is decent as well, because they're probably going to take multiple turns to kill. Also, the precision shots is quite good as well, because they've both got pretty big guns, so being able to place those on units that you want to is obviously useful. And they both benefit from the weapon skill and extra attack as well, one version more than the other. Don't forget that it stops your cyber theurgy though if you make them Paragon of Metal, which is a thing you might want to apply to these units, but they're both good units, so let's take a look at them individually. First, we got the Thanatar Kavas, so this is the one with the Plasma Mortar. The Plasma Mortar is a really strong weapon, so I was actually a little bit underwhelmed when I looked at it to start with. It doesn't have barrage, which may be an oversight, who knows with the way this book's written, but it doesn't have barrage, only a 36-inch range. It's basically a slightly bigger plasma cannon, but that is actually quite good. You know, on a unit that's very hard to kill, you can't really stop this shooting effectively, but importantly it's strength 8, so it can instant death all of those, things with 2+ armor save, and it's got the reactor overload rule, so it doubles your shots, which is really good, and that's quite important. It doesn't actually shoot twice. A lot of people misread this rule, so you get to shoot 2 shots with it. You get your full hits from your big blast template on both of those as well. This thing rarely does just shred Marines. A 5-inch blast will usually hit most of a Marine unit, particularly if they're clustered in some cover or something. Doing 2 of those is pretty much going to kill a heavy support squad or something like that and just wipe her off the board. And I played against one of these yesterday and it did just that. Killed my 10 Volkite Culverins in 1 round of shooting. Really, really good anti-Marine weapon. Probably the best one in the army, I think. Now, to do that with the reactor overload, it does hurt your model, but even if this model's taken some wounds on itself, even if it's, down to 4 wounds or something, do you really want to shoot your way through a toughness 8, 2+ save, 5+ invulnerable save model? It's still not an attractive target even when it's hurting itself. And there are plenty of ways to repair it, whether it's it will not die or using some of the battlesmiths in the army. If you need to do this and do it multiple times and keep it shooting, you can repair it if you want to. And also on top of that as well, if it's in range, to do it, you've got the Twin-Link Mauler Bolt Cannon as well. So that's some more Strength 6 shots to pour into the same unit as well, which have also got a chance of pinning. So this is just really good at killing Marines. It's a very optimal way in the army of doing it. And it can also shoot at Terminators as well with those big Strength 8 instant death shots. Now, it does only have 2 shock charges in melee. So, it's weapon skill 3, AP 3, it's strength 8, so it is going to kill Marines that are hit, but it's not very good at actually doing the fighting. So unlike other things, it's not really, a good thing to put into melee. It's more like it can defend itself. But if you have made a Paragon of Metal, the Rampage on Paragon of Metal will mean you've got up to 7 attacks, and that will certainly do something. So you can certainly stomp on some Space Marines if you need to, or maybe later in the game you've just got a clutch melee with one of these charging itself in. That could be good as well. Ultimately, good unit, lots of AP2 to the army. Certainly something this army lacks is good AP2. Certainly AP2 at strength 8 is not a common thing in this army. A little bit expensive for its damage output. I would say, it's basically 2 big plasma cannon shots, but realistically for what it brings to the table, very worthwhile and very hard for your opponent to remove. Then we've got the Thanatar Calyx. So this has actually got some slightly different weapons. It's got a Solex Heavy Las, 3 shots, Strength 10 Armor Bane, just flat Armor Bane, and Shock Pulse. That's pretty much going to penetrate or wound anything very reliably at range. So even a Spartan or something like that, you're going to pen with all of those shots that hit, and you're pretty much going to trigger Shock Pulse all the time. On average, is shooting a Dreadnought or a vehicle of anything like that, you're always going to trigger the Shock Pulse, and that's really nasty. You know, if you shoot an enemy Leviathan or an enemy big tank with this, you might not kill it in one round. I mean, you might, but you might not kill it in one round, particularly with a Dreadnought, but you do put them down to snapshots, which is quite a big deal, and does play quite well with what I think is one of the big themes in the Mechanicum book of lots of debuffs, lots of things that reduce your enemy's ability to fight. So this is a really good gun. You also get a Graviton Ram as well. So that's got some Haywire Flamer at close range. Bit difficult to use. Not the greatest weapon in the world, but if you are getting close, it is a little bit of extra Haywire, which is nice. It's got the Mauler Bolt Cannon as well. Little bit wasted maybe, unless you're Archimandrite and you can enable it to split fire, because the Bolt Cannon's going to probably want to be shooting at different targets than the Solex Heavy Las. But maybe sometimes, you know, if you're using this to shoot at some Terminators or something, you might get some pins off it as well. For melee, this is a bit better than the Kavas, because it's got the Graviton Ram, so it's Strength 10, AP 2. Sadly, doesn't have Brutal. Weirdly, you know, still hold out some hope that in an FAQ all these weapons get Brutal. If you're a Paragon of Metal again, Rampage will put you up to a nice 6 attacks, potentially, as long as you're fighting something with 2 or more models, which is pretty good, so you can smash up some Terminators as long as you can hit them. And, you know, you give it some blind or concussive, you can actually be quite effective in combat with this, if it's, you know, particularly if it's a Paragon of Metal as well. So, pretty good unit. Really, really good combo of damage and control with its big las weapon. Pretty effective for its points, hard for your opponent to remove, and also some pretty solid backup melee as well, certainly as far as Mechanicum melee ability goes. So both of these Thanatars, great buys. I made up that I own both of them, and a really good potential use of the heavy support slots in your Mechanicum army. Next we got the Myrmidon Destructor host, so the heavy support counterparts to the Myrmidon Secutors, which if you've seen my other review, I think are really, really good. These are similar. 145 points for 3 toughness 5 models with 4 wounds each and decent saves, and the ballistic skill 5 with big guns. Just a really good, you know, model to put guns on. One of the few units in the faction that can naturally use reactions as well, so unlike a lot of robots, unless they're being buffed by something, these guys can return fire if they get shot at, which is nice. And they can also move around while firing, which is a nice tactical option to have. Not super game-changing, but, you know, it's nice to be able to move your heavy weapons around and fire. Also, as well, because these guys can be line as well in Myrmidax with the Thanatar Calyx that we've just mentioned. Being able to move around is good because they can take objectives too. Now, they're not as good in melee as the Secutors are, but they come with shock charges, so at least they're AP 3 and they've got a reasonable number of attacks and the weapon skill 4 if they do get into combat, or you do need to just maybe finish off a few Marines. They are by no means defenseless in combat, which is a really nice thing to have as well. They've got quite a few weapon options that are pretty good as well, which we'll go into in a second. Now, they're not cheap, these guys, and their weapons are actually quite expensive, but the unit as a whole is not too expensive, and it is pretty difficult for your opponent to remove these guns. You know, as opposed to Space Marine heavy weapon squads, which can be easy to take off the table, these guys are generally quite a bit harder to remove. They're only going to lose 1 gun every 4 wounds, so, you know, if your opponent shoots these, does 6 wounds, they've actually only taken 1 gun off you. Whereas if you were a Space Marine heavy support unit, you would have just lost 6 guns and a big chunk of your firepower, so that's quite a big deal. And having an invulnerable save on an expensive heavy support unit like this is just a really good thing to have. You know, it makes a big difference having one versus not having one. So these are a pretty good unit. Let's have a look at their guns. Their default weapons are Volkite Culverin, and obviously this compares badly to Legion heavy support squads, because for 145 points you're getting 3 Volkite Culverins, whereas a Legion heavy support squad for the same points would be bringing about 7. So, although at ballistic skill 4. So that's not the best comparison. But at the same time, the Volkite Culverin is such a good gun, getting 5 shots, strength 6, that I actually do think it's completely viable here. If you don't compare it to the Space Marine equivalent, you would quite happily take a bunch of these. You know, three of these is 15 shots, ballistic skill 5, so they're going to hit with 13 on average, wounded on 2s. You're going to kill 3 or 4 Marines when they shoot, and then get some deflagrate, and that's pretty good. You know, they can walk up the battlefield, they're not super expensive, they've got AP3 melee weapons as well. I actually think the Volkite Culverin option is perfectly viable on these, if maybe a little bit unexciting. They can also take the Darkfire Cannon, which is an exciting gun. Now, it's AP2, it's only strength 7, unfortunately, so it doesn't quite get that instant death. But it is blind, which is, you know, good. And, you know, you trigger so many blind checks with this army, you will blind stuff quite often. And it's also lance as well. So, in a pinch, you can use it to knock chunks off vehicles too. It is quite an expensive weapon, though, at 20 points per model, and it does get hot. Which can, you know, it's AP2, so it's going to pen your basic save when you get hot, which does mean it is going to take chunks off your expensive Myrmidon models as well, potentially. But I do like the Darkfire Cannon. I do think it's a good option for these. The Graviton Implode is interesting. So if you want Graviton Myrmidons in general, you're probably better with Secutors because they got the same range, 18 inches, and they are cheaper for doing it, you know, and they get more shots. But that said, they don't get more shots, but they get the templates. The Graviton Imploders don't get templates, which is, again, maybe an oversight, who knows. But right now they don't. But what it does get is AP3. So you're paying for a little bit of flexibility here, and you can shoot stuff with the Grav, but alternatively, you can shoot a couple of Space Marines out of unit if you need to. And if these do get errata to have a template as well, these will be AP3 template Graviton weapons, which will make them actually pretty good. So potentially a good option, but we might have to wait for the FAQ to see how good. Now, the absolute scariest, best thing these guys can bring is the Irradiation Engine. So this is an AP3 Fleshbane Torrent 12-inch Flamer, which is a super naughty weapon, and this thing will just take off units of 3+ save Marines from the board. You know, it's very, very powerful at quite a long range. And if there's no Marines around to shoot at, you can do some other stuff with it. It's got Radphage, so you can also shoot enemy Dreadnought. Hope you get the -1 toughness on it with Radphage. If you manage that, you just need to roll a 2+ with a reroll on Fleshbane, so you actually wound Dreadnoughts quite well. You just got to hope they fail their save. And if they do, it makes them a lot easier to kill as well. The main thing, though, is these are just going to clear units of Marines off the board, and potentially, depending on who you play with and how, and what your armies are like, this might be a little bit anti-fun. You know, it's not that much fun just picking up enemy units and taking them off. And it's something that the Space Marine Legions books largely got rid of, that this book does actually still do. But because this book's generally quite a lot less powerful than the Legion books, it's maybe okay to use this because it will sort of bring, you know, a little bit of balance to the books when you're playing against Legion armies. I'll certainly be using 3 of these in my army to try and redress that balance a little bit. And then last but by no means least, everyone's favourite weapon, the Conversion Beamer. Now, in my opinion, if you're going to make Conversion Beamers work, this is maybe one of the best units to make them work on, because they can move around whilst firing, trying to keep their range, and they've got 3 ballistic skill 5 shots for 190 points. That's the most conversion beam shots with a reasonable accuracy you can get for their points, I think, that we've seen so far. So if you do manage to keep them at optimal range, they are probably going to do something, which is nice. Now, even if you don't get to keep them at range, one thing I do like about conversion beamers in this army is that they're another source of blind. And this army, as I keep mentioning, really likes blind to offset its weapon skill issues. So even if you are only at medium range, if you've got an assault unit close with your army, you can shoot it and try and blind it, maybe get a couple of kills off. It will still generally instant death things if they fail their saves, which is okay. Quite expensive, though, to do all that. And obviously difficult to make them work, but I think it's interesting and workable enough to be fun. And I'm going to make 3 of these just to try them, because I think it's worth a go. So all in all, Myrmidon Destructors, maybe not quite as good as Myrmidon Secutors. The weapons are quite on the expensive side for the, you know, how much they output, but definitely a workable unit. And if, like me, you like the idea of a Myrmidon cult, definitely a good unit to consider including in your army. So the Karacnos Assault Tank is a very big block of Forge World resin that's had a little bit of a glow up for this edition. So it's got an AV-15 frontal armor, well 14 with a flare shield, and it can fire from a big range. So being able to do that makes it very survivable. AV-15 stuff is not easy to kill at all. Even less easy to kill when it's got the range to sit really far at the back of the board, and potentially fire from out of line of sight if it really wants to avoid some enemy return fire as well. So very survivable tank, and only 235 points for this as well. It's not super expensive, particularly for an AV-15 vehicle. Its main weapon is the Karacnos mortar battery. It's got so many rules, it takes up 2 lines in the book. Actually, it's really good. It's got a 7-inch blast, which is massive. It's going to cover the whole of most units and often hit 2 units. It's also got crawling fire, which on a blast so big is really good. Because, you know, even if you're barraging, it makes you more accurate, but it means that you can very often easily hit 2 units with the crawling fire rule. It causes pinning, and it's got Shell Shock 3, which is massive. Absolutely massive leadership debuff there as well. So the only problem with it is, so it's also Fleshbane and Radphage as well. The only problem with it is getting a wound through onto a lot of the troops that you want to shoot in the game, which have got the heavy trait, is actually quite difficult because it doesn't penetrate their armor. So on average, a 3+ save with a reroll will only fail 1 in every 9 saves. So you need to really hit things a lot of times to get the pinning off. Now that's not a big issue because with a blast this big against most units, you're probably going to hit 10 of them anyway. So you should still force a pinning test on average, but you might not be killing a lot of models. On the flip side, against things that have a lesser save, this can really hurt a lot of stuff. But the main thing you're using this for is pinning Shell Shock 3, probably getting enough wounds thrown away to fire to kill a few guys as well. It's a really good weapon. But what really makes the tank worth its value is the fact that it also comes with 2 lightning locks. Now, lightning locks are really good guns. They're good for killing Marines because they are natively AP3. They've also got Rend on a 4+ as well, so they can hurt other things as well. And they're Strength 7, so they're going to wound on a 2. Now, when you combine 2 of those with a mortar battery for only 235 points, you are going to do a lot of damage to anything that you shoot at. You're going to do loads of wound. You're going to have a good chance of pinning what's left. That's pretty good. Now, in the fluff, these are independently targeting lightning locks, but this unit doesn't have Power of the Machine Spirit or anything, so they can't actually do that. But what you can do is use the sponsor rules. If you do want to split fire and not put everything into the same target, you can angle it in such a way as the sponsor rules will let you shoot one of your lightning locks at least at a second target. So pretty efficient way of using the tank. And then a few other things to mention about this tank as well. All 3 of the guns are blast weapons and benefit from a Nuncio Vox. So if you're bringing one of these, I would definitely try and fit a Nuncio Vox into your army. Actually, a lot of Mechanicum stuff benefits from a Nuncio Vox, which you can bring on the Tech Priest Auxilia, which is really good. The Karacnos has also got a shock ram, and if you've listened to the Troops review, you'll know how much I really love the shock ram for trying to concuss things and just doing extra damage. So it has got the ability to ram things if they start coming close as well. It's pretty safe from enemy fire when using its searchlight, which is nice because it's armor value 15. So giving you the option to light up an enemy unit at a long range with its long range guns whilst being pretty safe from return fire is good. You do need to be careful of its own hazardous munitions explosion though. It's a very big, very strong explosion, so you do want to keep it away from your own troops. Or alternatively, when you come to ramming people, use it offensively. You know, let your opponent shoot it in its weak side arm and then it just blows up and kills a bunch of stuff. Would be nice. Overall, the Karacnos, a really versatile weapons platform. It brings some great marine killing, the option or ability to kill 2+ save armor things as well. A really big pinning attack. It's got, you know, can potentially radphage enemy dreadnoughts and things as well. And a lot of armies are just going to find it tough or impossible to kill at range. And for the ones that can kill it, it can hide, you know, without shooting its lightning locks, slightly reduced effectiveness maybe, but it can hide as well. Big deal is it looks epic, and the mortar bay's open. And if you magnetize them, you can open them when you fire and then close them when you're not firing, and you can kind of like play tanks on the battlefield as well, which is just so cool. So Karacnos, really great vehicle, great option, looks cool on the tabletop. Another thing that fits into this really great heavy support slot for Mechanicum. The Krios is a mechanical looking battle tank, which is kind of interesting. It's basically a Predator in stats. It's got 13 armor. Even though in the fluff it's got a flare shield, and last edition it had, it seems to have lost it for now. Again, is that an oversight? Should it have had an option to buy one? Is it just gone? We don't know. What it does have is a 16-inch move and fast, which is very fast for anything really in the game. It's super good. Not the greatest survivability in the world, but you know, it's got 4 hit points and it will not die on a 6+. You know, it will not die on a 6+. doesn't really help with those stats, but it could occasionally. But it's still, tougher than a Predator for 125 points, slightly tougher. You probably need to use the speed on these to position them somewhere safe or relatively safe and return fire, which you certainly can do as long as you're on a decent battlefield with speed like that. It's got a galvanic traction drive as well, so you get to reroll your failed dangerous terrain test, which is really nice when you're this maneuverable, because you can, drive yourself through some dangerous terrain, maybe get yourself into some nice positions a bit more safely. It's got the option to buy Volkite calibers as well, but they're 30 points for 2 Volkite calibers. I don't understand why Volkite calibers are so expensive on everything in the game that can take them, kind of like conversion beams, so you're probably not going to take those. But overall, pretty good stats for a tank. Let's have a look at the couple of different weapon options it can take as well. The default Krios battle tank comes with a lightning cannon, so that's a 5-inch blast, strength 7, AP3, rend 4 weapon, which is pretty good. It's good at killing Marines. There's lots of other ways to kill Marines, though. That isn't a fragile-ish tank. Even though it's got rend 4, which is kind of nice, and it's got Exoshock 4 as well, which is interesting, it's still only one shot. So, although you can use that to maybe shoot at dreadnoughts or vehicles, etc., it's not great at doing it. So, the Krios battle tank is probably the weakest option in a heavy support slot, but I mean, it's still pretty good. If you've got one or you would like one, you can definitely make these, usable on tabletop. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that this slot is so good and so full of good stuff that these fall a bit far behind. The Krios Venator, on the other hand, is really good. So it's a 25-point upgrade, so it is quite expensive at that point, although still not too expensive for what it does. It's got what is effectively an ordnance for las cannon, strength 9, AP2, and that's really good because obviously you get to roll 2 dice for each of those and pick which one. So you've got a chance of penning without having, if you roll a glance with Sunder, you do a reroll. Sometimes you get nothing with ordnance. It's a little bit better. And it's also a pinning weapon, which is really interesting. So it makes it quite good at shooting at things like Terminators, because, you're good at killing elites with the profile. You've got instant death and Terminators, but when you kill one, you also might pin them as well, which is really good. It's also obviously very good at killing vehicles. Because it's fast, it can move its full 16 inches and fire its ordnance weapon, and particularly if you fight things that do have a lower side armor, this is obviously going to be great at getting inside armor as well, so a very destructive ability to flank there as well. So you get a lot out of this. 4 shots is a really good volume of las cannons, and 150 points is a more than reasonable price to pay for it. I really, really love this tank. I think it's a really great option for the army, and it does fill that AP2 hole that the army is not necessarily that great at as well, whilst also being very manoeuvrable. So this is another great option for your heavy support slots in Mechanicum. The Knight Moirax Talon are the armigers built and used by the Mechanicum specifically, so you can't take these in Questoris, and there are in-world reasons for that. When you're looking at the stats for these, again, repeat my mantra in your head, don't compare them to Contemptors, you're only going to be disappointed. That said, this unit does do enough to differentiate it from Contemptors, that even though they've got sort of very similar stats and the Contemptors a bit better, this does definitely have a role. And if Contemptors didn't exist, you would look at this for the 200 or so points it costs, and you would be super happy with this option in your army. So, don't get sad about them. They are actually very good. They move 8, and they're fleet, and they've got move through cover. That's pretty manoeuvrable from the outset. They can also react, which most things in a mechanical army can't, which is good. And then they've got an assorted smattering of different little rules. So they've got night vision, which is certainly a weakness of dreadnoughts, not being able to shoot at night time. They've got Gruiso protocol, which lets them fire Overwatch for a nearby knight or automata unit, which is kind of cool. Lets you get around the automata restrictions as well, to use a reaction, which is good. They've got a Rad Furnace, which gives you +1 to wound in melee, which this unit doesn't really need because it's going to wound everything on a 2-up anyway, but if you're pairing it with another unit, it can be helpful. And it's also got an Ionic Deflector, which is the same as an Atomantic Deflector, except you get Eternal Warrior, so you're completely immune to instant death, which is a nice throw-in as well. 3+ save on them, though, is a little bit of a letdown. It's going to make them significantly less survivable than equivalent Space Marine units, so you've definitely got to factor that in. These are not dreadnoughts in survivability at all. But Armiger is actually its own unit type, and it's very peculiar, and absolutely is the kind of thing we would expect to see FAQ'd. They're unaffected by haywire, because haywire doesn't mention armigers. They can't be repaired by a battlesmith, because battlesmith doesn't mention armigers. And also they're stubborn and not fearless, so they can actually be pinned as well. Now I think that bit's like intentional, but it is a difference in dreadnoughts that you do have to be aware of. But overall, the basic set of rules that Moirax get is pretty good. Now let's have a look at the weapon options as well. The melee option is the Siege Claw with a built-in IRAD cleanser. So this is strength times 2, which makes it strength 14, which is really high strength. Brutal 2, one of the few weapons in the book that get it. And it's also got Sunder and Wrecker as well. Somewhat limited by being weapon skill 4 compared to other things, but a very, very powerful weapon. As usual, blind or concuss something, go to town with this, would be pretty good. What's interesting about it is it can instant death dreadnought, because strength 14 will instant death contemptors, so you'll be doing D3 damage to a dreadnought when you hit them, which is pretty nice. It will also automatically pen most vehicles, so you're going to get a minimum of 15, and you've got Sunder, so you're almost always going to get that. For everything in the game right now, you're going to pen it automatically. And you've also got +2 to the damage roll, because it's AP2, and it's got Wrecker at all. So these are absolutely going to tear vehicles apart, and they're very fast. You know, you can't stop them getting into combat with a vehicle, so they're pretty much just going to kill any vehicle they charge at, which is really scary and very good. And I think the Siege Claw pairs quite well with a Lightning Lock or a Graviton Pulsar that we're going to have a look at in a minute as well. The other default option that they come with when you buy the Siege Claw version of the kit is the Volkite Vugler. I don't really understand why all of the bigger sort of vehicle-mounted Volkite weapons are so bad. You know, like, they just don't have enough shots, you know, compared to the foot-mounted ones, which are often very much the same. Like, using up a Walker's entire shooting slot on such a weak weapon is a bit silly, really. They really need to have, like, double the shots. So this is definitely very skippable. I would recommend not using this at all. Conversion beam cannon as well. Now, this, again, like the Destructors, these could maybe make use of the conversion beam cannon. So the Moirax is very fast, and it's got that maneuverability. So it definitely can keep itself at optimal range for the conversion beamers. And these ones have got a 5-inch blast as well. So there is a potential way to use them here. And I think if you can put 2 of these on a Moirax, maybe just one Moirax on its own and run it around the back of the battlefield, you could actually see some powerful conversion beam shots coming out of this model, which is certainly an interesting thing to think about. The 2 guns you're going to see the most, though, which are both really good. So one is the Lightning Lock, which has been a 40k, or was at least a 40k staple for a while. So again, it's got a small blast, it's got AP3, it's strength 7, it can also rend as well. Great choice for marine hunting, not too bad into elite units with rending as well. It could potentially flank and use its Exo Shock to take out light or medium vehicles too. So 2 shots with rending and Exo Shock as well, easily get enough, damage to blow up things like Predators and stuff. And also ping a couple of wounds off a Dreadnought. Now that can add up quite quickly. You know, if you manage to ping 2 off a Dreadnought with one of these a turn, that can add up. Really good gun, really versatile, quite cheap. Pairs well with the Claw in the other hand, or as a double Lightning Lock too. The Graviton Pulsar also is pretty good. So it's a long-range Graviton weapon, 24 inches. It's got 2 shots. It does drop a template as well. And a Moirax can bring 2 of these. So that's 4 24-inch haywire shots on a very mobile, very tough platform. That is going to be great at taking hull points off vehicles or dreadnoughts, and also good at just covering your opponent in grav templates, which is also very disruptive when your opponent's trying to move around the battlefield. I really, really like these. Again, I think as a double Graviton gun or a Graviton with a Siege Claw, I think these are really powerful and a great option to use on your Knight Moirax as well. In summary, Mechanicum are definitely spoiled for choice in this heavy support slot, even more so than Legion Space Marines are, probably. They tend to be highly survivable, the heavy support slot options, which is quite powerful. It's much harder to get their guns off the table. Tons of ways to kill enemy 3+ save troops, more than you need. Probably more than is maybe good for the game in some ways, because a lot of that stuff's been sort of taken out of the game and seems to have come back in this book, which does feed into the sort of, the feeling of maybe this book is not as much love and attention as the Legion book did. But either way, certainly a powerful thing for them to be able to do on the tabletop. Loads of options for the look and feel of your army in this slot as well. You've got tanks, you've got robots, you've got Myrmidons, you've got mini knights / armigers as well. You can mix and match all of them for a real smorgasbord of different units on the table, or you can focus your army on the tanks or something like that, or the robots. Just generally a great slot. And after doing the fast attack slot review for Mechanicum, it's really nice to do a slot review where everything is actually really good. So that's the end of the show. Bit of a long one, that, because there were so many good units to talk about and go through. If you enjoyed the show, please do leave me a like and a subscribe on YouTube and leave any comments down below. And don't forget to join us on Discord as well for the Heresy community. The link is in the video description. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. I'll speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.